If you take a moment and think about some of your most important relationships in the last couple of years, I wonder, have those relationships been easier or harder? Most people that I talk to may have a couple of relationships that have actually gotten stronger and better in the last couple of years. We've been forced to spend time together in new and significant ways. But also, there's a whole lot of relationships that have been stretched and strained in ways that we hadn't experienced before. And even people that you used to find easy to get along with, you find yourself being angry or frustrated with, or maybe there's a new distance in relationships that you wish wasn't there. I mean, the truth is, relationships have never been easy. I mean, we're imperfect people, and so our relationships are also imperfect. Every relationship has seasons and moments that are more difficult, and we have to learn how to navigate. And every relationship, whether that's between a spouse or partner, between employees and employers, between parents and kids, between friends, every relationship, even the best of relationships, has gaps in the relationship. And today I want to show you a decision that you make over and over again about what you put in that gap that makes the difference over time, whether that relationship will last, or that relationship will continue to flourish, or whether it will falter. And the decision we make over and over again is what we put in the gap between our expectations and our experience. Because in every relationship, again, every relationship, there's a gap between what we expect and what we actually experience. There's a gap between what we expect and what we experience. I mean, you said you were going to do this, but instead you did that. You said you were going to be here. Guess what? You weren't here. You said you would stop doing that thing, but instead you kept doing that thing. You said that you'd call about that thing, you didn't call about it. You said you'd pay the bill on time, but you didn't pay the bill on time. And at some point, in every relationship, there's a big gap or a small gap, but there's always a gap between what we expect to happen and what we experience actually happening. And whether that might be a deep thing, it may be a shallow thing, it may be a big deal, it may be not such a big deal, but at every opportunity in the gap, you make a decision. And our expectations are set based on agreements or a promise that somebody made, or just the history of the relationship. Based on, your mom always did it this way, or your dad always did it this way, or this is how we do it at this company. We have a certain set of expectations. And the question is, do people live up to those expectations? And here's the choice that you make over and over again that determines what happens when you experience a gap in the relationships. Either you make one of these two choices. Either I choose to believe the best, or I assume the worst. Assume the worst. And all of us do this every time we experience the gap in our relationships. We either choose to believe the best or assume the worst. That's what we put in the gap. And I actually don't have to say a lot about that, because you know what other people do. You know what your spouse does. You know what your boss does. You know what your employees do. You know what your kids do. The trick is, what do you do? Maybe it's harder for us to recognize what we tend to do and what we tend to put in the gap, but you could ask your spouse, your partner, your kids, your employees, and they know the answer. And the truth is, most of us, we actually do some of each. We tend to believe the best sometimes. We tend to assume the worst of others. It might depend on the history of the relationship. It might depend on just our current mindset or kind of how we're feeling that day. If somebody's running late, to believe the best is, maybe they just got stuck in traffic. I'm sure they'll be here soon. Or they're running late. If we assume the worst, we're saying, they're always late. He's never going to be on time anyway. I don't even know why we tried to start this meeting on time. And as soon as we have these expectations and we experience something different than we expect, there's a gap. And we make a choice. You make a choice to either believe the best or assume the worst. Maybe it's something about money, right? And you thought they were going to pay the bill or save the money. Instead, they spent the money. And if you believe the best, you say, well, they had a lot going on, or maybe they did save money that I didn't know about. And so we believe the best first. Or we could assume the worst, right? I say, you know what? He's never been any good with money. His family's no good with money. And man, I got to do everything around here. When he gets home, I'm going to tell him how. And this is how you know you're assuming the worst. As soon as you start wagging your finger, as soon as your voice goes up, as soon as your veins start to pop, it's probably true that you are assuming the worst. And so let me just ask you, in your relationships, most often, most frequently, when there's a gap in the relationship, do you tend to believe the best or assume the worst? As soon as you get the text saying, I'm running late, do you believe the best or assume the worst? As soon as you see that the stuff wasn't done, do you believe from your kids that do you believe the best in them, or do you assume the worst? Where do you tend to most naturally go? What's your default setting? And it might be different for different relationships. But I know what you're thinking, right? Think, well, let me tell you that story. If you understood what things were like with my daughter, or if you understood how that one employee worked, if I could just tell you about that situation, then maybe you'd put away your little tools up here and we could talk about something real. You're going to send me a message. You're already typing a comment down below about this isn't reflective of real life. And I know you maybe wish your boss could be here to see this tool, or you're going to forward it to him, or you wish your daughter was paying attention to this. But let me just stop you right there for just a second and say, maybe there's something here for you today as well. Because in every relationship, all of your relationships, you're putting something in the gap. And I know that a lot of times we think, well, the easy solution to this is just if people would just do what they said they would do, we wouldn't have this problem. We just close the gap. If people would just come through over and over again. Well, here's the truth, is that relationships that last, relationships that are deep and meaningful and that last over time, it's not because that they have closed all the gaps. It's not because all the gaps go away. In a marriage that lasts over time, it's not because there are no longer any gaps. Relationships that last have learned to believe the best and to use the gap as an invitation back into relationship, to create space for the other person, to move towards them again. We don't use the gap as a weapon to push people away and to remind them of their faults. Because guess what? That doesn't work with you either, does it? When people are always reminding you or pointing out the gaps, it doesn't mean we don't have hard conversations. It doesn't mean we can't be clear about our expectations. It doesn't mean that we let ourselves get hurt over and over again. But that's not where we start. We start by believing the best and creating space in a relationship that allows for grace and for understanding and for moving towards one another. Relationships that last start by believing the best. Today, in one of your relationships, I wonder, what are you putting in the gaps? When you get the text today, when you find out that the project wasn't done, when you get home and things weren't the way you expected them to be, what are you going to put in the gap? Some of the work we do in the Great Life Project is to help people design a life they love. And one of those essential elements of a life that you love is relationships that are meaningful, relationships that last. And this is a key tool to help us unpack how we're building those relationships over time and to learn how to believe the best and not just assume the worst. I'd love to help you continue to design a life that you love, because your life is your most important project. If you'd like to learn more, feel free to schedule a time and apply for a call. You can find that in the links below, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.